boardroom felt smaller than usual as I watched Robert pace in front of his PowerPoint presentation, gesturing dramatically at graphs and projections. 10 years of working alongside him, and I'd never seen him quite so confident, so sure of his victory. As you can see, he continued, straightening his expensive tie, the company needs strong leadership. Traditional leadership. The kind that Alice, despite her efforts, simply can't provide. My name is Alice Chin, and at 35, I was watching my brother-in-law try to steal my family's company right out from under me. Chen Manufacturing had been my father's life's work, built from nothing into a $200 million business. He passed away 3 months ago, and apparently, Robert thought that made me vulnerable. I glanced around the boardroom, noting the expressions on each face. Most were carefully neutral, years of corporate politics teaching them to hide their thoughts. But a few, the older members who'd known my father, couldn't quite mask their discomfort with Robert's naked ambition. Furthermore, Robert pressed on, clicking to his next slide. The numbers don't lie. Since taking over as interim CEO, Alice has maintained the status quo at best. No innovation, no growth. Just riding on Dad's coattails. Dad, the way he said it made my teeth clench. Robert had married my sister Karen 15 years ago, and somehow he decided that made him more of a son to my father than I'd ever been a daughter. The Asian markets are particularly concerning, he said, pointing to a downward trending line. Our presence there has been stagnant for the past 5 years. No expansion, no new partnerships, just the same old contracts Dad established decades ago. I had to bite back a smile at that. Robert had always been so focused on what he could see, what was right in front of him. He never bothered to look deeper, to question what might be happening beneath the surface. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Maya, my assistant. Time to move forward. Start the sequence. Her response was immediate. Everything's in place. They won't know what hit them. I tucked my phone away and returned my attention to Robert's presentation. He was in full stride now, outlining his vision for the company's future. More aggressive expansion, leveraged buyouts of smaller competitors, a complete restructuring of senior management. The board needs to face facts, he said, finally winding down. Chen Manufacturing needs a strong hand at the helm. Someone who understands modern business practices. Someone who can take us into the future. He paused for effect. Someone like me. The room was silent for a moment. Then Thomas Wong, the longest-serving board member and my father's oldest friend, cleared his throat. That's quite a presentation, Robert. Very ambitious. He turned to me. Alice, would you like to respond? I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. Actually, I have a presentation of my own. If you'll all direct your attention to your tablets. Robert frowned. He hadn't noticed the devices being placed at each seat during his speech. This isn't on the agenda. Oh, but it is, I interrupted smoothly. In fact, it's been on my agenda for quite some time. As the board members picked up their tablets, screens lit up with documents I'd spent years preparing. Contracts, financial records, partnership agreements, all carefully organized and annotated. What you're looking at, I explained, is the result of a decade-long expansion into the Asian market. Not through flashy acquisitions or hostile takeovers, but through carefully cultivated relationships and strategic partnerships. I walked to the front of the room, clicking through the documents on the main screen. While Robert was focused on our public contracts, I was building something much more valuable. A network of small but vital manufacturing partnerships across Asia. Companies that, as of this morning, are now wholly owned subsidiaries of Chen Manufacturing. Robert's face had gone pale. That's impossible. I oversee all acquisitions. All public acquisitions, I corrected. But these weren't acquisitions in the traditional sense. Each partnership was structured as a joint venture through a series of holding companies. Companies that, until today, appeared completely independent of Chen Manufacturing. I pulled up a map showing our new network, dozens of points of light spreading across Asia, all connected back to us. Together, these partnerships represent an additional $300 million in annual revenue. Revenue that's been quietly growing for years while you were busy planning your takeover. The board members were scrolling through their tablets, murmuring as they realized the scope of what they were seeing. Robert stood frozen, his perfect presentation forgotten. But, your father, he stammered. He never mentioned. My father, I said quietly. taught me that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. He taught me to build carefully, patiently, and most importantly, to always plan for the future. I clicked to the next slide, revealing a photo that made Robert's face go from pale to gray. It was from 10 years ago, my father and me in Singapore, signing the first of many partnership agreements. Dad didn't just know about this strategy, I continued. He helped me develop it. While you were busy trying to impress him with quarterly reports and PowerPoint presentations, he and I were laying the groundwork for Chen Manufacturing's real future. Robert's hands were shaking as he flipped through the documents on his tablet. These contracts, they can't be legal. The board never approved. Actually, Thomas Wong interrupted. We did. Those joint ventures were presented individually over the years, each one appearing relatively minor on its own. The board approved every single one. He smiled at me, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Rather brilliant strategy, wouldn't you say? I pulled up another document on the main screen, a summary of our new market position. With these partnerships now fully integrated, Chen Manufacturing isn't just a player in the Asian market. We're a dominant force. Our production capacity has tripled, our supply chain efficiency has increased by 200%, and our market penetration in key regions has grown exponentially. The board members were leaning forward now, fully engaged. Even those who had seemed sympathetic to Robert earlier were looking at the numbers with newfound interest. But the costs, Robert protested weakly. The leverage required for this kind of expansion is minimal. I cut in, switching to the financial slides. Each partnership was structured through profit-sharing agreements and gradual equity acquisition. We never had to take on significant debt or dilute our existing shares. In fact, I highlighted a particular figure that made several board members gasp. We're sitting on more cash reserves now than at any point in company history. Robert slumped back in his chair, his carefully crafted takeover plan crumbling before his eyes. But I wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, I said, nodding to Maya, who had quietly entered the room. She began distributing new folders to each board member. These are the details of a new joint venture, one that will transform Chen Manufacturing from a regional powerhouse into a global leader. As the board members opened their folders, Robert tried one last desperate play. You can't just spring this on us. There are procedures, protocols. Actually, Thomas interjected again. This proposal was submitted through proper channels 3 months ago. You signed off on it yourself, Robert. Though I suspect you didn't read past the first page, since it appeared to be a minor equipment upgrade for our Kuala Lumpur facility. I pulled up the complete proposal on the main screen. What looked like a simple modernization project is actually the cornerstone of a partnership with Takashi Industries in Japan. They've been looking for a manufacturing partner with our exact capabilities and network. The room erupted in murmurs as the implications sank in. Takashi Industries was one of the largest technology manufacturers in Asia. A partnership with them would put us in a whole new league. The deal is ready to close, I continued. All we need is board approval. And since the preliminary work was already approved 3 months ago, I let the sentence hang, enjoying the look of dawning horror on Robert's face. He had finally realized that while he'd been plotting his takeover, I'd been executing a plan 10 years in the making. Every minor decision he'd dismissed, every small partnership he'd ignored, every routine approval he'd signed off on without reading. They had all been pieces of a much larger puzzle. I moved to approve the Takashi partnership, Thomas announced formally. Second, came another voice, then another. Around the table, hands raised in support. Robert watched helplessly as his dreams of controlling Chen Manufacturing disappeared with each vote. But there was one more surprise waiting for him. One final item, I said, as Maya distributed a last set of documents, a complete audit of all executive decisions and financial transactions for the past 5 years. Robert's face went from red to white in an instant. I knew why. Buried in those transactions were numerous examples of his attempts to position himself for this takeover. Unauthorized expenses, manipulated reports, even a few instances of outright fraud. The board should review these carefully, I said, my voice steel beneath silk. I believe you'll find some interesting patterns that require immediate attention. The aftermath was exactly what I'd anticipated. As the board members dug through the audit results, Robert's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Every questionable decision, every manipulated report, Every hidden expense came to light. Extraordinary, Thomas said, reviewing the evidence in a special board session the next day. He'd been preparing for this takeover attempt for years, siphoning resources, manipulating project budgets, and documenting all of it himself, I added, pulling up more records on the screen. He was so confident in his success that he kept detailed records of everything. Probably planned to clean it all up once he took control. The board's decision was unanimous. Robert was terminated immediately, his company shares placed in escrow pending a full investigation. He was escorted from the building that afternoon, his box of belongings clutched to his chest like a shield. I watched from my office window as he loaded his things into his BMW. My phone buzzed. A text from Karen, my sister. Is it true? Did Robert really try to steal the company? I'd been dreading this conversation. Karen and I had always been close, despite her husband's attempts to drive a wedge between us. I called her immediately. Yes, I said when she answered. I'm so sorry, Karen. I have proof of everything. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she laughed. You know what's funny? I've suspected something like this for years. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the mysterious business trips. I thought he was having an affair. Are you okay? I asked, concerned about how she was taking all this. Honestly, I'm relieved. I filed for divorce last week. Found out he's been hiding money in offshore accounts. I guess now I know why. I smiled, thinking of one more surprise I had in store. About those offshore accounts, you might want to have your lawyer call me. I have some information that could be useful. Because while Robert had thought he was being clever with his hidden accounts, he'd never realized that his offshore banking activities had crossed paths with my Asian business network. Every transaction, every hidden transfer had been noted, documented, and added to my evidence file. The next few months were transformative for Chen Manufacturing. The Takashi partnership exceeded all expectations, opening up new markets and opportunities we hadn't even anticipated. Our stock price soared as the business media picked up on our overnight expansion into Asia. Karen, armed with the offshore banking information I provided, won a decisive victory in her divorce settlement. She joined the company as our new head of international relations, her natural diplomatic skills proving invaluable in managing our growing network of partnerships. One evening, about 6 months after Robert's departure, I was working late in my office when Thomas stopped by. Your father would be proud, he said, settling into a chair. He always said you had a gift for seeing the bigger picture. I glanced at the photo on my desk, Dad and me in Singapore, both of us grinning at the camera. He taught me well. Success isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive, he used to say. It's about being the most prepared. Thomas nodded. You know, Robert never understood why James spent so much time teaching you about the business. He used to complain about it in board meetings, said it was a waste of time. I laughed. Robert saw what he wanted to see, a dutiful daughter learning the family business to please her father. He never realized Dad was training his successor. And now look at us. Thomas gestured to the city lights visible through my office window. Chen Manufacturing is stronger than ever. Your father built something remarkable, but you've taken it to heights he only dreamed of. I thought about the decade I'd spent building our Asian network. The countless nights spent poring over contracts, the long flights to remote factories, the patient cultivation of relationships that Robert had dismissed as minor partnerships. We're not done yet, I said, pulling up a new presentation on my computer. Take a look at this. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw the plans. South America. You're already thinking about expansion? I've been thinking about it for 3 years, I corrected, showing him the groundwork I'd already laid. Those equipment upgrades we approved last quarter, they weren't just for efficiency. As I outlined the next phase of Chen Manufacturing's growth, I could almost hear Dad's voice. Always be 3 steps ahead, Alice. Let them think they know your plan, while you're actually playing a completely different game. The company Robert had tried to steal was already gone, transformed into something larger and more powerful than he could have imagined. His attempted takeover hadn't just failed, it had accelerated our evolution into a truly global enterprise. Karen stopped by later that evening, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a familiar glint in her eye. The Singapore office just called, she said, settling into a chair. They found something interesting. I smiled, reaching for a fresh notepad. Some people thought business was about aggressive takeovers and dramatic power plays. But Dad had taught me the truth. Real success was built quietly, patiently, one careful step at a time. Robert had wanted to be a CEO. I was focused on building a legacy, and this was just the beginning. The next morning, as I prepared for another board meeting, I found a note Dad had left in his old desk drawer. Remember, Alice, the best moves are the ones they never see coming. Not because you hid them, but because they weren't paying attention. I pinned it to my bulletin board right next to our latest market projections. Chen Manufacturing wasn't just surviving. We were thriving, growing in ways Robert had never imagined possible. Because while he'd been plotting a hostile takeover, I'd been building something far more powerful, a future that would honor my father's legacy while taking us beyond anything he could have dreamed. That's the thing about true vision. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply unfolds one careful step at a time until suddenly everyone looks up and realizes the game changed while they weren't watching. And by then, it's too late to do anything but stand back and watch it happen.